Narrator, tone, serious. The cold night deepened, and the garden was covered with fallen magnolia petals. Outside the door, whispers could be heard.
The lady's illness has dragged on for so long, it seems to have taken root in her bones. Even the foreign doctor came and prescribed several medicines, but none have worked.
Keep your voice down. If someone hears you gossiping, you might get in serious trouble.
I'm just worried about the lady, hoping she gets better soon.
Narrator, tone, serious. Their voices lowered, and soon the conversation faded into silence.
Emily, tone, friendly mother, your embroidery is getting better and better.
Helen, tone, cheerful. Thank you, Emily. Your skills are improving too.
Narrator, tone, serious. Emily blinked in the direction of the voice. Her eyes were beautiful, clear, and bright, like black pearls set in delicate features. But those eyes could see nothing. Narrator, tone, sad. Everyone knew that James, the current president of the Textile Merchants Association, had a daughter who lost her sight at the age of 7 due to a disaster. Since then, she had been blind.
Emily, tone, shy father, I can't see, but I can still hear. I want to go to school, is that okay?
James, tone, hopeful of course, Emily. We'll find a way.
Narrator, tone, serious. James knew these words were taught to her by her older brother, David. Unfortunately, there were no schools for the blind nearby, and the local girls' schools refused to accept her. James had to comfort her and let David teach her some basic knowledge.
David, tone, cheerful. Come on, Emily, let's start with something simple today.
Narrator, tone, sad. David's enthusiasm waned quickly, and he soon forgot about it. Emily spent her days staring at the sky in the courtyard. Her mother couldn't bear to see her like this and secretly taught her shoe embroidery. Narrator, tone, serious. Initially, James was curious about how his wife planned to teach Emily embroidery. But after a few visits, he stopped coming. Emily couldn't see, so her mother separated the different colored threads on a wooden board with hundreds of nails, arranging them for Emily to memorize. Someone else threaded the needles for her. Emily put in great effort to remember the colors, but when it came to actual embroidery, she couldn't distinguish the colors of the scenes.
Emily, tone, shy mother, is this okay?
Helen, tone, cheerful. It's beautiful, Emily. You're doing wonderfully.
Narrator, tone, sad. Whenever Emily handed her embroidery to her mother, she was anxious. Her mother would comfort her and praise her work. She saw the scars on Emily's fingers from the needle pricks and held back her tears, teaching her the essence of shoe embroidery with even more care. Narrator, tone, serious. Her mother knew she was giving Emily a reason to live, showing her she wasn't useless and could create beautiful hibiscus and lively koi fish. But the results were minimal.
James, tone, serious. Emily, your mother needs rest. Don't disturb her too often.
Narrator, tone, serious. Emily indeed stopped visiting her mother frequently. Instead, she would bring all her completed works at once for her mother to see. Narrator, tone, serious. James didn't know Emily still held onto her passion for shoe embroidery. He thought she had given up years ago when she stopped asking him about it.
Helen, tone, cheerful. Emily, the John family's child is returning next month. How about we give this handkerchief to him?
Emily indeed stopped visiting her mother frequently. Instead, she would bring all her completed works at once for her mother to see.
Surprised, Emily, I didn't know you still held onto your passion for shoe embroidery. I thought you had given it up years ago.
Helen leaned against the bed, looking at Emily's embroidery one by one. The koi fish seemed to swim right out of the backyard pond and into the picture. Her skills had become increasingly refined.
Emily, the John family's child is returning next month. How about we give this handkerchief to him?
Is John really coming back?
Yes, my dear. You remember John, don't you?
Emily's childhood fiancé, John, was from a military family. Helen had been a lady from a prestigious family and a close friend of Isabella, John's mother. When Helen was about to give birth, Isabella suggested that if Helen gave birth to a daughter, their family should become in-laws.
When you were born, Isabella held my hand and said, "Helen, I guessed right. We are going to be in-laws."
As Emily grew up, she became a delicate and lovely girl. John, however, was aloof and rarely spoke. During those times, Emily and David were often sent to the John family to play.
Mother, do you remember when David accidentally knocked over that bottle of antiseptic and it splashed into my eyes?
Yes, my dear. To avoid being scolded, he hastily rinsed your eyes with water and hid the broken bottle. By the time we realized the severity, it was too late.
I lived in darkness, terrified and often crying, only calming down when you stayed by my side.
Helen removed the embroidery hoop and placed the handkerchief in Emily's hand.
Emily, my health is failing, but the John family is a good match. If you marry into their family, you won't have to worry about anything, and I can rest easy.
Mother, I don't want to be useless, sitting in a room all day, unable to see or do anything. I want to do what I love.
If you marry into the John family, you won't have to embroider anymore. Your fingers, if seen by your future family, might make them worry.
Mother, I want to do what I love.
Is your father still busy?
Father just took on a commission to embroider a landscape for a wealthy family. They specifically requested him, so he can't delay.
His students aren't very talented, and David doesn't want to learn shoe embroidery. He's focused on Western medicine and recently talked about not inheriting the family business, but buying foreign machines to start an embroidery factory.
Mother, my brother has his own ideas.
Those machines take workers' money, and what will they live on? It's all the foreigners' fault.
You're of marrying age. My biggest worry is you. If you marry into the John family, I won't have to worry about anything else. When John arrives tomorrow, remember to give him this handkerchief. The John family is a good match, and I can rest easy.
I'll go now, Mother. Take care of yourself.
James had maintained a good relationship with the John family over the years. Despite recent turmoil causing some distance, their friendship still stood. In the main hall, James was exchanging pleasantries with Isabella, Mrs. John.
Isabella, it's been a while. How have you been?
I've been well, James. Actually, my visit today is not just to see Helen, there's something else I need to discuss with you.
Oh? What is it, Isabella?
James, you know, the engagement between John and Emily was just a joke between Helen and me. But when Helen had a daughter, we took it seriously.
A hint of guilt flashed in Isabella's eyes but was quickly replaced by other emotions.
John has a bright future ahead of him, as you know. If Emily were a normal girl, it would be fine, but she can't see. John has many good girls around him. I can't let a joke from the past ruin his marriage. He can't marry someone who is visually impaired. The John family can't have such a lady. If word got out, how many people would laugh at him?
After Isabella left, James initially intended to keep this from Helen, but the news somehow reached her. Her condition worsened, and she passed away within days. Today was Helen's funeral. More and more guests arrived to attend the service. James and David were busy greeting the guests. Emily kept her eyes lowered, her gaze empty, occasionally tossing some paper money into the fire pit by feel.
Is that the young lady of the family?
Yes, the one kneeling by the coffin. I heard she was once engaged to the eldest son of the John family, but a few days ago, Mrs. John came with lavish gifts to break off the engagement.
This young lady is quite beautiful, but unfortunately, she's visually impaired. What a pity.
Even if she weren't visually impaired, the John family might not want to marry into this family. This could just be an excuse for breaking off the engagement.
The discussions outside reached Emily's ears. She had thought she could remain indifferent, but hearing those words felt like a knife to her heart. Unknowingly, she and John had drifted so far apart. Even if she could see, she was no longer a match for him.
Tears streamed down Emily's cheeks as she knelt by the coffin, feeling a sense of confusion.
Emily had believed that James and David could turn the family's situation around, but now it seemed they were powerless. The people were right. Even though Emily was visually impaired, James and Helen had never worried about her marriage because of the John family.
John no longer wants me, and my mother is gone. Who would want to marry a visually impaired girl?
Someone else in an inconspicuous corner of the hall also heard these words. He looked at the elegant figure by the coffin, her cheeks still wet with tears, and felt a surge of pity. The discussions continued, filled with sympathy for Emily. James had invited monks from the largest temple in the city to perform the rites and bless the departed soul. As the time approached, everyone else was asked to leave the hall.
She tried to stand up, supporting herself on the cushion, but her legs were numb from kneeling too long, and one leg had completely lost feeling.
Just as she was about to fall, a strong hand steadied her by the shoulder, preventing her from collapsing.
Who is that? Why is he so close to the young lady?
I think that's the eldest son of the John family, John. He returned from abroad a month ago, and General John even took him to a banquet at the Olympic Club. I had the honor of seeing him there. It should be him.
Didn't they break off the engagement?
I heard Mrs. John and Mrs. Sue were close friends in their youth, and that's why the engagement was arranged. Even though it's been called off, the old friendship remains. John must be here out of respect for that.
The discussions reached Emily's ears. Realizing that the person who helped her was John, she felt a mix of emotions and lowered her head in self-abasement.
Mr. John, thank you.
Emily had intended to call him by his first name but changed her mind. They no longer had an engagement, and even the basic friendship had faded over the years. It was more appropriate to call him Mr. John.
No need.
After a moment, Emily's leg regained feeling. She slowly stood up and politely said,
I can stand now, Mr. John. Thank you for your help.
John did not let go. Emily's eyes reddened slightly, but she lowered her head, sighing. He was supposed to be her husband, but now he was just a stranger. It was probably out of pity that he helped her. How pitiful. Her mother was gone, the engagement was broken, and as a visually impaired girl, what future did she have?
Overcome with sorrow, she let out a bitter laugh, her legs trembling, and she almost knelt again.
Emily, let's get married.
John's voice, though cold, was deep and magnetic, very pleasant to hear, and reassuring. A person with such a voice must be quite handsome. Emily couldn't help but feel a bit regretful, wishing her eyes weren't blind.
Miss, why did Mr. Shao come today?
To deliver the marriage proposal.
Marriage proposal? Doesn't that mean a proposal? That's wonderful. If Madam knew you were marrying Mr. Shao, she would be at peace even in the afterlife.
Hearing Grace mention Helen, Emily lowered her eyes, sighing inwardly. Helen had always hoped for Emily to marry John, waiting for the Shao family to propose. Now that John had come to propose, Helen was no longer here. In the main hall, James had already finished reading the marriage proposal and the gift list, marveling at the Shao family's generosity.
You're back? I've read both the marriage proposal and the gift list, and there are no issues.
Once I have prepared all the gifts, I'll have the matchmaker deliver them. The marriage proposal has been delivered, and we've met, so I'll take my leave now.
Why the rush? Stay for lunch before you go.
No, there are still matters in the military that cannot be delayed.
Then go ahead, work is important. David, see John out.
All right.
Goodbye.
Watching John's departing figure, James felt a weight lifted off his shoulders. The matters he had been concerned about, Emily's marriage and the embroidery business, were finally settled. At night, 2 red candles stood tall on the long table, their flickering light illuminating the red paper cutouts of double happiness characters behind them. The room was decorated festively. On a new pearwood bed, Emily, dressed in her wedding attire, sat with her hands folded, a red veil covering her head. Underneath the wedding attire was a red inner garment with azalea flowers embroidered on the cuffs, symbolizing prosperity. Over it was a dragon and phoenix jacket, with a stand-up collar and a row of straight buttons. The jacket was embroidered with auspicious symbols like dragons, phoenixes, 5 blessings birds, and pomegranates, each with its own meaning. The cuffs and hem were finished with cloud patterns, and the various embroidered designs on the jacket and skirt were harmonious and beautiful, adding to the festive atmosphere. This wedding attire had been rushed out by the Sue family's embroidery workshop in the past 2 months, with meticulous hand embroidery. Red curtains hung from the 4 corners of the bed, and Emily sat motionless at the edge, appearing calm but feeling extremely nervous inside, her daytime wedding fatigue overshadowed by her anxiety. The door was gently pushed open from the outside, and Emily smelled a strong scent of alcohol, but the person's steps were steady, not like someone who had drunk a lot. The footsteps drew closer, and Emily felt someone lift the veil from her head, making her even more nervous. She sensed a moment of stillness in the air as the veil fell. John stood by the window, looking at the poised and quiet Emily sitting on the bed. A flash of surprise crossed his cold eyes, though she couldn't see, she was quite beautiful. Emily, petite and delicate, looked even more so in her red wedding attire. Her eyes were like 2 bright black pearls, though their lack of focus added a touch of imperfection to her beauty, making it seem a pity. John was not wearing wedding attire but a deep green military uniform, standing tall and straight. The light cast shadows on his chiseled features, adding a hint of coldness. Emily could feel John's gaze on her, making her even more afraid to move. Footsteps sounded again from the doorway. This time, Emily recognized them as Grace's. John, hearing the faint footsteps behind him, turned to look at Grace, frowning slightly in displeasure at the interruption.
Sir, I'm here to help Miss freshen up.
Leave now, John said in a low, heavy voice, causing Grace to flee in panic. Emily was a bit flustered, but she couldn't see ahead and could only look forward helplessly.
I don't know if I'm worthy of you. If you don't want to.
Before she could finish, a rough fingertip pressed against her lips.
I want to.
Emily was surprised. She knew she wasn't worthy of him, her family background wasn't good enough, and she was blind, while he had so many noble ladies to choose from. Moreover, they had already broken off the engagement. Why would he still? Emily couldn't understand and felt even more anxious. John stepped forward, embracing her, his voice low and husky.
I'm sorry, I came too late. I was delayed by some matters and hadn't visited in time, leading my mother to break off the engagement. I've always liked you and never intended to break it off.
He touched the girl's smooth forehead.
Do you know? I've liked you for a very long time, Emily. I will cherish and take care of you for a lifetime.